that we covered last time, be in lesson 4. Says the invasion occurred in 11:1. What invasion occurred there? Who was the enemy there? Okay, Nahash the Ammonite was the king there that attacked the city. It says, what did the city beg? Why did the city beg for a covenant? He camped against them, and they were too weak. Says in verse 1. Says question 3. It says, what conditions were offered for the covenant? He gave them a covenant. Remember what he asked? Yeah, you gouge out their right eye of every man, and that's not much of just a humiliation. And question 4 says, why did the Israelites ask for 7 days to decide whether or not to agree to the covenant? And see if any of their brethren would come to their aid, and if not, they would surrender. What was Saul doing when the messengers of Jabesh arrived at Gibeah? Plowing his field and working with his oxen. What motivated Saul to action? Yeah, the Spirit of God came upon him, and he was very angry. So he's motivated to act. And 7 says, what did Saul use to motivate the Israelites to assemble for battle? Cut up the oxen and sent the pieces out to the different tribes to show what would happen to them if their oxen if they didn't come. How many Israelites assembled in his army? 300,000 from Israel and 30,000 from Judah. And what military strategy did Saul use to win the battle? Remember how he attacked and when he attacked? He had 3 groups, and he attacked before the morning watch. He attacked very early in the morning. What purpose is served by what is reported in chapter 11? What do you think it tells us about, the kingdom there in that chapter? Kind of a positive chapter for Saul, don't you think? At this particular time in his reign, he was he's going to be confirmed as king again. It shows his leadership that he had, and they're going to renew the kingdom, and they're going to defeat the opposition that was complaining about his rule over them. That's silenced in chapter 11. Let's see. Question 11 says, what did Samuel call on Israel to do at Gilgal? Renew the kingdom, offer peace offerings, rejoice. And then when Samuel spoke at Gilgal, what did he ask Israel to give testimony to? He'd been a judge for 40 years, but he called them all as witnesses. He had never taken a bribe. He'd never taken anybody's property against their will or taken advantage of his position as a judge. 13, what was Israel to learn from Samuel's citation of history? He went through the history of God and what God had done for them. They had rejected God as king and taken Saul to be the king. And God had been a good king to them. They had cried to the Lord in the past, and certainly they shouldn't forget to do that. Shouldn't serve Baal. be sold into captivity. They should cry to God for deliverance, that he was a good king that they should have respected. And 14, what conduct did God promise to have toward Israel's king? They obey him, then they're obedient, they'll follow the Lord. If disobedient, the Lord will be against them. There 13 through 15. It says, what public demonstration did God send to confirm that Israel had acted wickedly in calling for a king? You know, it was the sign. Thunder and rain came at the command there of Samuel and confirmed his words during the wheat harvest when it didn't rain. And what impact did this have on the people's estimation of God and Samuel? They feared the Lord and they feared Samuel. They understood he had authority from God to say what he said. What did the people ask Samuel to do for Israel, even though he's no longer going to be their judge? Right? Ask him to pray for them. That's what the apostles said they were going to do. Or they were going to devote themselves to the word and to prayer. They want Samuel to continue to pray on their behalf before God, intercede for them. What role should we expect Samuel to should we expect of Samuel in the following chapters? He mentions a couple of things he'll continue to do. He's going to continue to pray for them. He's going to continue to exhort them and preach to them to walk in the right way, go in the way God wants you to go. The good and right way is what he's going to preach to them. That's what we all need to, learn as a principle for us today. These things are written as examples for us. We're not under that same law that they were under, but we serve the same God. And we want to be faithful to our covenant. We need to be obedient. We need to fear the Lord, never depart from him. We need to walk in the right way, and we need to emphasize to one another that we need to walk in the right way. This brings us up then to chapter 13 and 14 go together pretty well, and also chapter 15, probably look at it separately, see how far we can get it. Seems like our time flies. Chapter 13, we begin to see the failures of Saul and the mistakes that he makes. And you begin to see what a flawed leader he actually is later on. Started off very humble in the beginning. And of course, he did well as long as he stayed humble. But later on, he gets arrogant and opinionated and acts without God. As a result, his reign is going to be ruined. And he's going to lose the dynasty in his family that could have been there. The kingdom could have continued on. But instead, he's disobedient to the Lord. And so his family is not going to continue to rule. And then later in chapter 15, he becomes disobedient to God again. And he's going to be removed from being king. God's going to raise up somebody to take his place that will do what God says. It will be after God's heart. And of course, sort of setting the stage for David coming on the scene. So in chapter 12, it says now, chapter 13, says, Saul was, and again, this first verse in the New American Standard, it has it in italics there. Saul was, it says 30 in italics, but it's not there in the Greek. I looked it up in the Hebrew interlinear, where you have the Hebrew on one line and the English underneath, and it's just, you can see it's just like an impartial translation. It's like all the words aren't there. In the Greek translation, they don't even have it. The first verse isn't even in the Greek Bible when they translate it. So you just really can't go by what it says here, because it's just, there's been damage to the text, or, I guess in some manuscripts it wasn't even there. So Saul was blank years old when he began to reign, and he reigned blank 2 years over Israel. So we don't, so you just can't go by that verse because it's incomplete. But the Apostle Paul says that he reigned for 40 years. And the Apostle Paul was guided by the Holy Spirit. So whatever he had to say was true. He gives that round number of 40 years as being the length of time that he reigned. So when you look at these things that are found here, and you reason like we did last week, we had Saul was a very young man on a mission for his father when he got anointed the king. He was so humble and shy when they tried to anoint him. He was hiding by the baggage. He wouldn't even come out unless they drug him out and made him the king. So he was probably a young man when he started off as a king. Now he's got a son that's probably 20 years old at least. He's got 5 other children. So he has been around a while by the time you get to this chapter. So this is thought to be about 20 years later. He's probably about 45 years old by the time the things in this chapter happen. So in the early days of his reign, he was doing well, but now, he's, the reason I say there on the notes there, scholars are divided on, how old he was here in chapter 13. If you don't take what Paul says, then they try to make his reign like 20 years long. Let's say you have right.
Even though you look at
He's 20-something years old. That's what I was trying to say. I know it's in the King James Version there. And the New American Standard, it translates it completely different than that. And in the 70, the Greek Old Testament doesn't have the verse at all. So it's a damaged verse that's come down to us. And, in the King James Version, they took all of the Byzantine texts and things that they had and did the best they could, to translate it from those. But, this is just a flawed passage. We just really don't know how to translate. So if it's not in some of the texts and it's kind of in a garbled way in the others, then you just kind of have to ignore it. Paul said he reigned for 40 years. We know Jonathan's in command of some troops when you're reading here. So it seems to be maybe 20 years after he started reigning at least that Jonathan was that old. So it's probably in the middle of his 40 years. It's around when this happened. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember where we got the 10 years, but well, we started off, he got anointed, and then a few years, some period later, then this Nahash invaded, and he had to go up there and fight that battle. And then they renewed the kingdom, and now here we are, another incident. This seems to be much later. Now we got Jonathan. Let's see. So we got Jonathan again. He's 20 years old, and there's 5 other children of Saul that are going to be mentioned. There's 3,000 chosen men. Go ahead and read the second verse. It says, now, here is the, we're reading the wrong chapter. 2 says, now Saul chose for himself 3,000 men of Israel, of which 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash, in the hill country of Bethel, while 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah of Benjamin. But he sent away the rest of the people, each to his tent. And Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that were in Gibeah, or Geba. And the Philistines heard of it. And then Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, let the Hebrews hear. And all Israel heard the news that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines, and also that Israel had become odious to the Philistines. And the people were then summoned to Saul at Gilgal. So we got several cities that are mentioned there. And if you notice on this map, shows where these places are at. We'll look at a number of maps. Here's Michmash. It's located here. This is about 4 miles apart from Gibeah, where Saul is at. Geba is where a Philistine garrison is at that's going to be attacked by Jonathan. And these Philistines have come into the land. They're occupying part of the land. Once Jonathan attacks here at Geba, there's panic goes through the land because now they know there's going to be war with the Philistines. And we're told Saul goes from Gibeah down to Gilgal, down by the Jordan River. And those are the kind of the locations there. And again, we'll look at more detailed maps as we go along. So you got Michmash up there, and you can see on that map, these hills that are there. I think it's Michmash is 1,900 feet above sea level. Bethel's like 2,800 feet. So I mean, they're on top of big hills, and we'll see some pictures of Israel. You can see the Jordan River, remember, is like 1,000 feet below sea level. So Gilgal is way down there next to the Jordan River. So there's a lot of geographic features here that separate these cities from one another, and valleys and canyons that are there that are on this battlefield. And so you got 1,000 with Jonathan, and then you got 2,000 with Saul. And he had already sent home a number of troops from another battle that he'd been engaged in. He was fighting it all, as we'll read at the end of the chapter, against nations all around Israel. But at this time, the standing army, is just 3,000, sort of the central, the officers and the main part of Saul's full-time army is 3,000. When they go to war, they call up everybody else to come out and fight. So he's kind of dismissed everybody else. And so then you got Jonathan smiting that garrison of the Philistines. It shows Jonathan's bravery. He's attacking these invaders in the land and attacks their garrison. And of course, it's going to encourage the people, as I would hope was what he was hoping to do, to drive these people out of the land by attacking them and driving out this garrison and killing them. But and then Saul is going to summon the people to Gilgal, down by the Jordan River, to come to him and form the army and go out and fight the Philistines. And here's a map that kind of shows the actions that are going to follow. You have the Philistines' headquarters here at Michmash. Jonathan attacked Gibeah, and then Saul is going to go back down towards Gilgal and summons Israel to come to him. Meanwhile, a very large army of Philistines comes marching in to Michmash. And then they divide up and go in 3 different directions, send out 3 raiding parties to raid the land. And the people of Israel are terrified and start hiding in caves and anywhere they can find to hide. So their courage just melts away here in this chapter before this battle takes place. So we're told about the large army of the Philistines that comes in. So now the Philistines assembled to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people like sand, which is on the seashore in abundance. And they came up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth Aven. So that's a terrifying sight to see all of these men. Looks like a innumerable army of Philistines. They brought their whole force, I guess, into the land. And now the numbers terrify the Israelites. And we're told about the reaction of the people. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were hard pressed, then the people hid themselves in caves and thickets and cliffs, in cellars and pits. And some of the Hebrews crossed the Jordan into the land of Gad and Gilead. But as for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. So this great army comes into the land, and it's thought there may be, a misprint when it comes to this 30,000 chariots. And a lot of times in these oldest books that we have, some of the numbers are suspect sometimes, because if there were 30,000 chariots, it would have been the biggest army ever in the ancient world. You know, when we were studying in Judges, there's one of the kings had 900 chariots. Well, usually had more horsemen than did chariots. And to have 30,000 chariots, that'd be bigger than any of the big empires had when they went to war. 30,000 chariots. So maybe 3,000 chariots. But anyway, it says 30,000 in the best text that's come down to us. And 6,000 horsemen, and people like the sand. And here again are some drawings from Egypt of what Philistines look like with this feather dress on. Here they are with ox carts, and they're fighting the Egyptians there. So we have some picture of what they look like. There's another artist representation of their chariots. So again, you've got the Jordan River, and down here is Gilgal, and that's where Saul was at. And many of the people have fled over on the other side of the Jordan. They're so afraid of this Philistine army. And notice this ravine that's here, it's a big canyon. And from Gibeah, you're going to have Jonathan go down and climb up a cliff to get to the garrison there at Michmash and defeat some soldiers there at the top of the hill with God's help. He's going to kill 20 of them all by himself. And then God strikes fear into them. Is how they're going to end up winning this battle. But that's a feature we'll look at in some pictures too, where that canyon is out there. It's one of those things, you know, if I was ever able to go over there, that's one of the places I want to go and look at. We have Brother McGarvey's book where he walked through that valley, and he describes in his book, you know, that it's just like the Bible describes it. The canyon there were two rocks that stick up on either side. One's Moses, and the other's Sina. They look like teeth sticking up on the top of these cliffs. When he walks through, he could see right where Jonathan could have come down with his armor bearer, and where he could have climbed up, and where the battle would have happened. You can stand there and see all of that if you're in the land. So anyway, the Israelites are afraid, and some of them hide. They're in a tight spot, it says. They know they're in a strait. They're full of despair. They seek to escape and hide from all of these raiders and the soldiers that are coming into the land. They're in the caves and the thickets and the cliffs and the cellars and the pits. Any place they can try to hide and get away from these Philistines. You see how they're cowering away from this enemy. And some even go across the Jordan into Gad and Gilead on the other side of the Jordan River, trying to get away from the Philistines. So there's great terror in the land. It shows something about the bravery of Saul and Jonathan, that they're still on the other side of the river. They're still trying to gather the army together and fight. So no doubt Saul was a brave man. And Jonathan, what a king he would have been, right? But because of what his father does, he'll never be king. But Jonathan was a great man of faith, friend of David, you know, unselfish. He would have been a great man. But because of his father, he's not going to end up being king. He'll die with his father in battle. At the same time he died. But Jonathan is very opposite of these people. He's a man of faith. He's fearless, and they're full of fear. So you can see they're not trusting in God much. So they're going to have a sacrifice offered, and they're supposed to wait 7 days for Samuel to come and offer the sacrifice. That's the command from God. And then we see what goes wrong here. It says, now he waited 7 days, Saul did there, according to the appointed time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. So Saul said, bring to me the burnt offering and the peace offering. And he offered the burnt offering. And as soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him and said to greet him. But Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, because I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the appointed days, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash. Therefore I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not asked the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandments of the Lord your God, which he commanded you. For now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. So very serious sin here. I think a lot of human beings think, oh, that was not that big a deal. Wow. But he didn't obey God, and it was a test for whether he would obey God. Didn't we establish in the chapter before? Samuel speaks for God. He has heaven's blessing on the things he says. And when he gives a commandment, it should be followed because that's God's commandment. And he told them, wait for me 7 days and I'll come offer the sacrifice. And Saul waited 7 days and, almost. He waited part of a day anyway. And then he went ahead and had the sacrifice offered anyway. So we're told the people were scattering. They were afraid of the Philistines, and as time went on, they began to melt away from Saul. And he acted impatiently, disrespected God's word, and he wanted to have the Lord's help on his side. He wanted to offer the sacrifice, so he didn't wait on Samuel. He went ahead and had it offered. The burnt offering and the peace offering were going to be offered, and it seems like Samuel walks up. First you offer the burnt offering, and then you offer the peace offering after that. And they never get to the peace offering. That's where Samuel walks up. So right in between the two sacrifices, if he'd have just waited that much longer, Samuel would have been there, and everything would have been all right. But he couldn't wait on the Lord. Remember what Moses told the people at the Red Sea? He said, wait, and watch, and you'll see the salvation of the Lord. But these people, Saul can't wait. He's going to have to I have to do something. And so he goes ahead and has this offered. When it says he offered the sacrifice, I don't think it necessarily means he personally, as the king, offered the sacrifice. I have a number of passages there where David offered the sacrifice or Solomon offered the sacrifice. It says exactly the same thing, but they were faithful men and they had it done. When you command something to be done, the Bible speaks about you doing it. But they had priests that were there and men that could offer the sacrifices, but the king commanded them to go ahead with it. So it was offered up, but it wasn't offered the way Samuel said, wait for me. And he didn't wait. So he is rebuked for not waiting. And on the seventh day, again, we just think if he could have held out the whole seventh day, it'd been fine. And sometimes the Lord puts us to a test. We're called upon to wait and be patient and wait on the Lord. And he wasn't willing to do that all the way to the end. He was moved by circumstances was his excuse. He said, people were leaving me, and I thought the Philistines were going to come and get us, and I had to go ahead and do this. It wasn't any scriptural reason. It was just the circumstances. I had to do what I had to do. The question was, what have you done? So no divine instruction. He had a lack of faith. There was excuse. And this is something Saul does in chapter 15 too. He always blames everybody else. The people got me to do it. The Philistines were going to come. And I had to do it because of the people and the Philistines and all this. And he doesn't own up to responsibility when he does things. It's like many of us. Sometimes we are tempted to do the same thing. We want to shift the blame to somebody else. And what have you done was the question. Not what did the people do? What were the Philistines going to do? What have you done? You didn't follow God's commandment. That's what you did. You disobeyed. He said he needed God's help, and he forced himself to do it in an unscriptural way, a way contrary to God's command. Well, that's not ever the right answer. We need to do what God says and trust God that he's going to take care of things according to his commands that he's given. So he tells him, you did a foolish thing when you didn't follow God's commandment. Don't you think this is a great example to show people about it matters whether you keep the commandments or not? We're under the new covenant. When the Lord tells us to do things a certain way, that's the way they ought to be done. He disobeyed God. That's what it says. He did not wait. And God took that very seriously, that he did not obey the commandment. It showed that his heart wasn't right with God. that he was trusting his own judgment instead of the word of God. And his obedience would have brought blessings. He was wanting the blessing of God, and he offered the sacrifice in a way God said not to. So he could say, well, I was just wanting the blessings of God. But you got to seek those blessings the way God says to you. That's the thing. If he'd have asked if he'd waited on Samuel, he'd have got the blessings of God. God would have delivered him. So his dynasty, his rule would have continued, but now God's going to seek out a man after his own heart. God's decided he's going to give the kingdom to him, and he's going to rule over Israel. He'll be an obedient man. That's something you can say about David. He was one that he never followed the Baals. He tried to do things the Lord's way. Like all of us, he made some mistakes sometimes, but it wasn't that he didn't respect God and want to do what God had to say. He had some sins, certainly of weakness, that he paid some terrible prices for, we're going to see. But he was always faithful to the one God in the service that he did. In looking at Samuel's rebuke, again, the last part of that section, Samuel departs, and then Jonathan and Saul, they're down to 600 men. They had 3,000, and that didn't seem like enough. And now they've only got 600 after all this happens. And the Philistines have invaded the land with this huge army. You're down to just a small remnant of the army we were talking about a few weeks ago, or last week, when they had 330,000. Now they've got 600. So verse 15 says, and Samuel arose and went from Gilgal to Gibeah of Benjamin. And Saul numbered the people who were present with him, about 600 men. Now Saul and his son Jonathan and the people who were present with them were staying at Gibeah of Benjamin, while the Philistines camped at Michmash. And the raiders came from the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned toward Ophrah and the land of Shual, and another company turned toward Beth Horon, and another company turned towards the border, which overlooks the valley of Zeboim into the wilderness. So we have there again this. There is a difference here again on the way our English translations translate this where they were camping. Remember, Gibeah is right up here next to the valley. Gibeah is down here. And sometimes these translations in English aren't consistent in the way they translate these two cities. And I've noticed, I've got a revised version of the New American Standard here. The one I was using at the house was 1971 version of this. And it says Gibeah. This one says Gibeah. That's where they went. So there's been a dispute about that all along too. As to Gibeah seems to fit the context, because Jonathan's going to go down there and he starts defeating them at Michmash, and Saul sees it. Well, this Gibeah, it'd be very hard to see, another 3 miles away to be able to see what Jonathan was doing. But if he was up there right on the edge of the cliff, he could have looked across and seen. So again, some of these words, some of these names of towns and words, they're just a letter different or a little bit. You can see why there'd be some confusion between Gibeah and Gibeah. But anyway, you see that in different translations. The American Standard Version agrees with what I just read here, Gibeah. The King James Version, I think, says Gibeah. But anyway, you've got those two names confused in some passages. Right, that's possible too. And maybe Gibeah is part of, under the authority of Gibeah, or sort of like the same district or whatever, only a couple miles apart. Not all that important, but it is a difference you see in the different translations. Here's a picture of what the site where Michmash looks like today. Where Jonathan's going to climb up on that hill there. It's like, say, 1,900 feet above sea level, where he's going to fight that. And then there's a picture here of Gibeah on the other side of the ravine. There's a little town that's there today, too. And Well, here's the pass. See this canyon? Well, look at some other closer up pictures of this. Here's the canyon that divides these two, where Michmash is at and Gibeah is at. There's a big valley that's there, 1,000 feet deep or so. That you have to go down and come up a sheer place there. That's what Jonathan climbs up with his armor bearer in order to attack them. Here's another picture of it. The cliff that's there, and there you see those two jagged peaks that are there. One is Sina, and the other is Bozez. The Philistines send out those three groups of raiders to go out and spoil the land in verses 17 and 18, and they go in those three directions as we looked at. The Ophrah's up to the north, and then the way of Beth Horon, they go down, it's kind of a valley that direction. And then they have another group that goes the way of Zeboim, or the way of the wilderness, down towards the Jordan River. So they're raiding the land, destroying the land is what the word means. They're destroyers, just go out to tear up things and kill people and terrorize the countryside. And then we have a passage that tells us about just what a weak position Israel was in with these Philistines. In verse 19, it begins, now no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines, each to sharpen his plowshare or his mattock, his axe, his hoe. The charge was 2/3 of a shekel for the plowshare, the mattock, and the forks, and the axes, and the fixed hoes. So it came about on the day of battle that neither sword nor spear was found in the hands of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and his son Jonathan. And the garrison of the Philistines went out to the pass of Michmash. So that's that canyon. They've got a group overlooking that canyon. So the Israelites, they have no blacksmiths. That shows the superiority, physically speaking, that the Philistines had over everybody. They had iron weapons. The Israelites don't have any iron weapons. And that is a big problem. Here's some things that have been dug up by archaeologists where you can see these iron blades, handles that have been found from those ancient times. So you have the beginning of the Iron Age going on at this time, where they're using iron weapons and iron chariots. And whoever's got them is superior to somebody that's using bronze or something weaker to fight with. And the Israelites can't even get their farm tools taken care of unless they go down and spend 3 days' wages in order to get them sharpened. So this 2/3 of a shekel is equal to about 3 denarii, and that's a day's wage. So 3 days of whatever you make, you have to spend to go get your hoe sharpened or something, so you can till your land and take care of it. So the only people with a sword or a spear is actually Saul and Jonathan. They're the only ones that have any iron weapons on them at this time. And Jonathan's going to make good use of his. But it doesn't matter how many weapons you have. If you've got the Lord on your side, it doesn't matter. That's what we're going to see. God demands patience and full obedience from people, and that's where Saul went wrong. And you see the folly of trusting in men's strength. He was worried about the army drifting away and all of that. He had just been obedient to the Lord and faithful to the Lord. Jonathan's going to show him it just took one man to run all these Philistines off. One man of faith is going to change everything. And if Saul had faith, that's all it would have taken. So all of that, he was overthinking everything. So in chapter 14, then, Jonathan and his armor bearer plan their attack on this Philistine garrison. There you have a more close-up picture of this valley. Here you're looking east. So Jonathan would have come down over on the right side and had to climb up on the left side to where the Philistines were overlooking the valley there. It says, now the day came, and Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who was carrying his armor, come and let us cross over to the Philistine garrison that is on the other side. But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah, under the pomegranate tree, which is at Migron, and the people who were with him were about 600 men. And Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the priest of the Lord, at Shiloh, was wearing an ephod. And the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. So you got the high priest there, the Ark of the Covenant, we're going to find out. So they have means of inquiring of the Lord about things that's present there with the priest. And nobody knows what Jonathan's up to. It says, between the passes by which Jonathan sought to cross over to the Philistine garrison, there was a sharp crag on the one side and a sharp crag on the other. And the name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other was Sina. And one crag rose up on the north opposite Michmash, and the other on the south side opposite Geba. And Jonathan said to the young man who was carrying his armor, come and let us cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. And his armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart. Turn yourself, and here I am with you according to your desire. And Jonathan said, behold, we will cross over to the men and reveal ourselves to them. And if they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up. For the Lord has given them into our hands, and this shall be a sign to us. And when both of them revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines said, behold, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves. So the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us, and we will tell you something. And Jonathan said to the armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hands of Israel. And then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet with his armor bearer behind him. And they fell before Jonathan. His armor bearer put some to death after him. And the first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men, within about half a furrow in an acre of land. And there was a trembling in the camp, in the field, and among all the people, and even the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it became a great trembling. So Jonathan goes up, and through this act of faith, he slaughters these 20 men. So they cross over, show themselves down there in the bottom of that valley. I'm out of time.